night, everybody. You guys did fantastic. I didn't even have to call it to order. You guys basically all just got quiet already. This is great. I love this. That must mean that we have a bunch of very intelligent, good-looking people here tonight, because you are here for another edition of the Conversation Coalition, y'all. Woo! We are very, very excited. Real quick, I will own up to something, because I'm sure there's at least one of you out there that's saying, Elliot, you've spent so long telling us the last Thursday of the month. And this, in fact, is not the last Thursday of the month. You are correct. And in fact, I'll go ahead and get some housekeeping out of the way. Next month's event will also not be the last Thursday of the month. I know, but at least we're consistent in disappointing you, right? No, we moved this one up just a week just to avoid the holiday. We're doing the same thing with next month, so that will be on the 20th. Right here, very simple, very easy. Just come on back and have a good time. We will be taking the month of December off. I will say all this again at the end of it, so don't worry, I won't be talking too long because I know you guys are excited to see what these wonderful guys have to say tonight. And with that, I will just shut up and say I am super duper excited for this event. I think it is going to be a really, really fun one. We've got 5 really awesome people. You are probably familiar with most of these people. They have graced the stage a couple of times. We've got a couple of new people as well. But again, guys, as always, the point of the Conversation Coalition is to kind of cut through the yelling. I think we've all probably experienced in the last handful of years a rise in just really unfriendly, non-productive conversations that lead to name-calling and yelling, and nothing ever changes. So 2 years ago, a couple of us decided we wanted to try something different. And we're really, really excited that we are almost at the end of our second year going strong, and not a single punch has been thrown yet. So we'll see. No, but I will get out of the way so that we can get right on into this wonderful conversation, and I will hand it over to our moderator tonight, Mr. Brandon Baxter.
Thank you, Elliot. And just for clarification, are we going to stop at some point for questions? So will that be at around
an hour
7:30? Mm-hmm. Great. Good evening. I think we've got a short. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Reverend Brandon Baxter, and I am the pastor at East End United Methodist Church, and I have been participating with the Conversation Coalition for a little over a year now, and it is good to have you here this evening. And tonight our topic is going to be all around the origins of morality, is what the evening was called. But as Elliot gave me instructions, he said, really anything, as long as we stay on the topic of morality, we're in a good place. So we'll see where this conversation ends up going. I'm going to serve as the moderator tonight, so I'm just between the different perspectives here, and we'll try to help guide the conversation along. But first, we're going to start with just some brief introductions. So maybe give just 30 seconds of who you are and where you come from and why you're here tonight. And we'll start to my right.
Hey everyone. Is that on? Yeah. My name's Tim. I am an evangelist and apologist. I love public street evangelism in the park. I've actually run into some people in this room while I've been out doing that. My passion for apologetics grew out of my passion for evangelism. Now, I co-founded an organization called the Tennessee Fellowship for Christian Apologetics. We do local apologetic fellowship nights, did our first conference this year. And so I'm all things, just passionate about all things about the biblical worldview.
I'm Brandon Sutton. I'm the pastor at Christ Fellowship in Gallatin. Share a lot of the same convictions and passions as Tim here, and love having these conversations.
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick, and I've been in this community since 2010. Like Tim, I came to this area for the Army and stuck around. And I'm actually excited about the topic tonight because, as opposed to a lot of these conversations where some of us who are on the secular atheist side talk about, what we don't believe, tonight we actually get to talk about what we do believe in a positive sense. And morality is something that's of interest to me because I am at the ripe old age of 51, finishing up my degree in philosophy and religion with a focus on ethics up the road to Austin P. And I have a paper due tonight at 12. So if I seem a little sleep deprived, but no, this is something that I really enjoy talking about a lot, and I'm looking forward to hearing you guys' thoughts and you guys' questions as well. So.
Hi, my name's Ben Stuckey. I've been an atheist for about 12 years, so I'm on the atheist side, I guess. And yeah, this is just a topic of interest for me. So yeah, I'm excited to talk with everyone about it.
Okay, so I'm going to throw out the first question here, and I think it's a fundamental one. It might sound big at first, but I think it's really important to get us started, and I don't care who wants to take it first, so whoever feels compelled, go first. But I think if we're going to talk about the origins of morality, I think the first question we have to ask is, what is morality? So if you would, give me your elevator pitch or definition of what is morality.
Morality, just as a simple English word, means, when I use it, a standard of right and wrong behavior. More specifically, what Brandon and I will be advocating for is a standard of objective morality, which is a standard of right and wrong behavior that is determined by an external factor and not subject to human preference or opinion. You'll hear more about that as we get into it, but that's going to, there's a morality rooted in the Christian worldview and the nature of God and his revelation, which I'm sure we'll get into more in a moment. But that's a general good working definition, I think.
Yeah, and I would say that morality is the product of evolution and the human experience. That's just writ large. It's also something that, as a product of evolution, is shared by all cultures. And what that means is that all cultures have some kind of moral code that says, don't kill or don't steal or, any kind of level of prohibitions. But as we know, number one, the definitions of morality vary a lot, right? And not only that, but I would say that everybody has some kind of morality. And that is something that we, I guess, appreciate or inherit through like instinct, and I guess it's kind of part of our nature. But as we know, that's just a very basic starting point, because if we start with a very basic instinctual starting point, there's some things that's not going to solve. So that's where the conversations that we have, the ability for us as societies and individuals and relationships to process and to talk things over, the better the process, the better the morality. So I would describe my view as far as the ideal morality is something that I would call constructivist morality. Morality is something that we build. And the better the building process, the better the things that we believe, like the facts and so forth that we accept, the better the morality. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Brandon or Ben, do you have anything to add or a different perspective?
I affirm everything Tim said.
Yeah, I can get behind it as a standard of good and bad behavior, that sort of thing. Yeah, I know. Patrick's more on the constructivist view. My thoughts around it are more as a personal, intuitive kind of experience and how people make choices in that.
Okay, so we've got a constructivist view. We've got this kind of personal, experiential morality, and we've got an objection. One from the objectivist side over here, specifically rooted in biblical principle, I guess you would say. So let's dig a little more into that then. Let's dig into where do you then think morality best comes from, or where do we get our sense of morality? And I think that answer is going to be very different from the folks up here. So whoever wants to start, go for it.
Yeah, I think our sense of morality, like I was saying, you have to start with the end in mind, right? What are we doing this for? And I would say that morality are the things that, in terms of like in our day-to-day, are the things that we should do if we have a couple goals in mind. And number one, we accept the fact that we're all alive, right? That's the is. So the should becomes if you want to survive and if you want to thrive, right? Survive and thrive, those are where the should comes from. Like the nature of, it would be better if we do this way, or we've learned that that way of doing things does not work out so well. Experience and our process that we share tells us that we should do it this way if we want to survive and thrive. Okay, so that is where I think morality comes into our day-to-day. Now, what you or I might choose to do in one situation, we can also ask, well, how would that play out if everybody did that sort of thing? So I'm referencing, Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, like, what if everybody acted the way we did in that situation? And that's where, thankfully, it gets a little more involved, a little more complicated, a little bit more, it's not just quite so simple as, well, I do what I feel. No, that's subjective, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a process that can make sure that for the least of us, the least powerful, the ones who sometimes get marginalized or taken advantage of, do they have a voice to say, hey, wait a minute, I object here. This is not working for me. And so the better the process, the better the construction process of including all of the voices, the better the morality is going to be.
Okay. Somebody from this side want to kind of give an underpinning of your idea of the origin of morality, and then also if you want to respond to anything that you heard there that maybe is challenged by your view.
Well, I'll just start with, I know Tim will affirm this, is morality originates in the character of God himself. So the standard of morality we find in Scripture actually originates in who God is as the eternal creator. We believe that there's objective right and wrong because God is objective in his being. And just to respond to what was just said, that the shoulds and the oughts are derived from what causes us to survive and thrive, that would be a terrifying world to live in. Because if we're just doing what is good to survive and thrive, then we can sacrifice and we can put the marginalized to the side if it means that the whole is going to survive. I mean, this is what happened in Nazi Germany, is that if you were a Jew looking for refuge, those people who believed that the Nazi Germany was wrong and what they were doing would bring them in to hide them at the risk of their own lives. But the atheistic worldview, what you're saying is that actually would be against what would cause someone to survive and thrive. And so it would actually be more advantageous to say, no, you're on your own. Whereas the Christian worldview has a concept of sacrifice and love, because the shoulds and the oughts don't come from what would cause me to thrive. The shoulds and the oughts come from what God has said in his word. And so I'm glad you said that. I appreciate that. I respect that, because that is consistent with an atheistic evolutionary worldview. I just think it provides a terrifying world to live in.
Response from either of you about how you might respond to that.
Well, first, that's sort of record time to get into Nazi Germany, so I'm just appreciating that. I don't think the way that you characterize an atheistic worldview is actually the atheist worldview.
Do we have an atheistic worldview? What is that? I don't know.
I don't think there's a uniform atheistic worldview, but they seem to think so. So my view is that there's good reason to believe that the way we have a shared experience of morality and what's right and wrong is due to evolution. So that's my view. I think the way you're seeing evolution as always for yourself, always selfish, always self-serving, is just a flawed view of what evolution actually does. Because as humans, we rely on each other to survive. If I'm not able to function in a community and benefit a community of people that help me survive, I'll die. Humans survive together. And because of that, I need to have the kinds of behaviors and actions and moral intuitions that would help me help my community survive and thrive, like protecting them if they're in danger. So I think it's just a two-dimensional view of how evolution actually works in the world and how it could create this type of behavior.
Community is a very ambiguous term, and it's subjective to how you want to define and identify your community. So you could define it in a particular way, and Nazi Germany always comes to the forefront of moral discussions because I think it's such a great example of where communities clash. You have a community in Nazi Germany that decided that this way of living was the best for what they identified as their community, that other communities said no. But in an atheistic or a naturalistic worldview, both views of moral systems are equally valid. We may not like them, but they're going to be equally valid. No, one is not less true. One is not less morally true than the other.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about, Brandon, it sounds like you were saying about it being terrifying somehow to make sure that the least powerful voice in the room were heard and protected. To use your example, I would say that what happened tragically in Nazi Germany is an exactly perfect example of why constructivist views should not be ignored. That would have been, like, constructivist view would have prevented that, because what happened in Germany, as happens in fascist countries all over, is that they tried to demonize or scapegoat one particular small group, a minority. All of your problems come from this group, right? And what we're saying is, in constructivist, hey, we're all in this together type of morality, like Ben was just talking about, everybody gets a vote. Right? And so if Germany had been a constructivist system, in this case, the Jewish and the Gypsy and all the other, the LGBT communities that were persecuted by them would have had the right to say, this does not work for me. And in case you're wondering what a constructivist morality looks like, guess what? We're in one. I would say that our laws, the laws that we have in this country right now, are built on precedent. They're built on, hopefully, factual arguments, right? And we don't say that any particular law is divine inspired or comes from above. No, we have the laws that we start with, and then we always reserve the right to make amendments, constitutional amendment. It's like we always reserve, it's always provisional, right? That's what constructivist morality is an example of. Another example, I would say, of constructivist system would be the scientific method, right? We have, the better the evidence, the better the process to check the evidence and check the conclusions and peer review and all these different things. The scientific method, I think, is a great example of a constructivist system. And yeah, and I would say even like the conversational standards that we would have in a debate like this. We realize that if we engage in what are called logical fallacies, right, of saying, well, you believe this, and therefore, how stupid is that, blah, 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 that's called a straw man argument. And so we know that when we have these types of conversations, we have certain rules of the road that we build as we go along because we realize it works out better. And so these are a couple examples of, really, we're not talking about something so strange. It's not theoretical. It's not idealistic. We're in it.
And my point wasn't so much, that it would be a terrifying society if you listen to the marginalized voices. My point was that in a society where, let's just say, for example, you have a society, and this has been true throughout history in many different parts of the world, where it was illegal to be a Christian. It was illegal to be a Protestant. And in fact, if you were a Protestant in particular areas in Europe, particularly practicing outside of the church, then you would be jailed and or killed. And so let's just say we live in a society of 100,000 people, and in that society there is a small group, a remnant, maybe 100 people, who the law has deemed these people are dangerous. These people must be arrested and executed. My point was, with with your statement about we must do, the oughts come from what causes us to survive and thrive. In that society, one, and this is a talking point a lot from atheists, society as a whole has decided what's right and what's wrong. It's right to execute these particular people. And so you would have to conform your views to that. And if you didn't, I would argue you're appealing to a transcendent moral standard. If inside of you you're saying, no, I'm actually with this 0.1% of people, then you're not appealing to the societal view of morality. You're appealing to an objective standard of morality that comes from outside of yourself. But the point I was making, that if in that society you were put into the position where you were supposed to either hide some of these people for their safety or to say, no, you need to be out on the street, the atheistic point of view that you brought up about surviving and about thriving, that's where the oughts come from. Well, then you ought not let them in. You ought to keep them on the streets. You ought to keep them marginalized because the vast majority of society says so, and that's what's going to cause you and your family to thrive. To bring them in puts your life at jeopardy, puts your life at risk, because now you're harboring enemies of the state. And because of that, you too can be penalized just like them. And so from an atheistic worldview, it makes no sense to let them in. It makes no sense to give them any help whatsoever, because to do so goes against the very principle of what it means to be an evolutionary atheist.
I'll let you respond, and then I want to ask something, but go for it. Go.
I just wanted to ask Patrick if you think the majority of society tells you what is right or wrong.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, what they're describing is not what we are proposing at all. So, I mean, you can keep saying that, a couple more times, but that's kind of not what I don't know if that's from like an apologetics thing.
I said it's a talking point
somewhere.
of some atheists. The principle I heard you lay out was, and I think this is what you said, is that the shoulds and the oughts, which means the moral rights and wrongs, come from what causes us to survive and thrive. Is that a principle you're willing to stick to?
Yeah, and did you hear the part where we were talking about the categorical imperative of what if we did this for everybody? Because another way you could approach it is to say, hey man, what would you do if somebody were to say hey, this group here is persecuted? Would you take somebody in and hide them? Right, rather than say the quote unquote atheistic worldview, whatever that is, would do this. Dude, we're sitting right here. Ask us. You know what I mean?
I agree you are, and that's why I say consistent. I don't think atheists live consistently within their worldview. I don't think you possibly can.
Okay. Well, we've had a couple key things brought up here. The fact that a lot of times morality has to be put into a form, especially in terms of laws or rules for the road. And we've also been kind of playing with this idea of morality as being something that might guard those that are at risk of being oppressed or marginalized or outcast. So let me hear a little bit about why your ideas of origins of morality do a good job at helping inform that rule-making, meaning-making for a larger society, and how it also possibly does the job of doing that work of seeking the well-being of all people.
So when you ask the question, whose system of morality, or why does your system of morality do a good job? The word good is going to be subjective. In the Christian and biblical worldview, the word good means that which brings glory to God. So that's going to be the fulfillment of God's design for marriage, the fulfillment of God's design and pursuit of God's design for local government, for the way we raise our children. It's not to pursue happiness and good feelings, but to pursue the glory of God. And if we are living in accordance with God's perfect and good design, then we will flourish as God has intended us to flourish. So only the Christian worldview can fulfill that moral truth that comes from God's revelation.
So can I ask a follow-up just to dig a little more there?
Yeah.
Just so there's clarity, because we talked about a situation here a few minutes ago that involved people of different religious backgrounds. So, we bring up Nazi Germany, and you've got Jews and Christians and all of this. So how then does a worldview that is rooted only, that says that the Christian way of living or of understanding the world and understanding morality is what gets us all to that place of flourishing. What happens when certain people don't fit into that or refuse to fit into that worldview? I mean, how does that then, how has society continued to be shaped morally?
Well, sure. It would depend on how they refuse to conform to that system of morality. Everybody legislates morality. We can get into that maybe more later. But what that looks like in a Christian worldview is that if somebody murders someone or if somebody rapes someone, they have violated an image bearer of God. And as such, they are worthy of the death penalty because they have violated something that is the most sacred of all of creation. And that is an unshaking foundation. So somebody's going to make a decision that a human being is worthless, or that this human being is maybe less of a person than this class of a human being. And so I am justified in treating them that way. As Christians, we would say, full stop, you are not. That is an image bearer of the Lord Almighty. You have no right to do those kinds of things to you, and we will hold you to a standard of justice that is set forth by God.
Okay, so you might want to respond to that, and I'll let you, but then I want to hear your answer to the same question, which is, how does your worldview kind of do the job of creating flourishing or create opportunities for flourishing in a greater society?
Yeah, I hear what you were saying, Brandon, about the tragedy of religious persecution, right? And Protestants and other groups were persecuted in Europe, and I happen to know because my ancestors were persecuted by both the Protestants and the Catholics. The tragedy of all of that situation is that all three of those groups, the Protestants or the Lutherans, the Catholics, and the Anabaptists, of which I think maybe there's a connection with the Baptists. Anyways, all of those groups were Christian, right? So the fact that you believe in an absolute morality really does nothing for you when it comes down to like, okay, how should we then live? How should we then treat each other? And then a broader example of that I would offer is I'm going to throw out 4 names that you'll probably recognize, right? And you guys tell me what they all have in common. Number 1, I would say the Ayatollah of Iran, okay? Bibi Netanyahu, the president premier of Israel, right? Vladimir Putin, and our own President Donald Trump. What do all 4 of them have in common? They're all over 72, all white, all conservative, authoritarian, I would argue not nice people. All of them trace their authority to the God of Abraham. So really what they're claiming as an authoritative, absolute source of morality is really, when you come down to it, it's fairly arbitrary. And what you said, what I heard you say of like, hey, well, this is the only one we recognize. Yeah, that's just kind of like an arbitrary claim, right? Because all of those 4 other guys claim the same authority as well. And we could throw the Pope in there too, right? It really does nothing for you in terms of establishing your morality. And to your question, which I think is a good one, okay, how does your morality account for the good of society? Yeah, I'd say having everybody, including the quote-unquote least of these, having the right to object, the right to veto, the right to say, yeah, this does not work for me, is a great place to start. And we've seen over the course of history where, even in our own country, we started out with the Declaration of Independence and some basic rights, and then along in the 60s came Martin Luther King, also a Christian. And he said, that check that we've been, it's a void check, it's a bad check. We want to cash in on that inheritance too, right? Unfortunately, those are rights that were denied to those Christians by other Christians. Not just any Christians, Baptist Christians, right? So I guess all that to say that having the right to object and everybody being in on the process is a great place to start when you want to see how good your morality is going to be in society.
I just want to say, just because there's been abuses of things doesn't mean the thing itself is inherently bad. I don't think that just because there's been abuses of things doesn't mean that that thing is inherently bad. There's been abuse of religion all throughout human history. But I think you would say that you're a man of science. You wouldn't condemn the 20th century scientists who developed the atom bomb, or you wouldn't condemn science because those men developed the atom bomb, right? You wouldn't condemn the thing because they used the thing to do something that caused mass destruction. But what I would say is, yes, but the difference between your worldview and ours is we can look at the actions of, say, Vladimir Putin, who invaded Ukraine unlawfully, right? And we can say that was wrong because of this. We can look at President Trump and say the peace deal he just made between the Palestinians and the Jews, that is objectively good. And then we can look at his marital track record and say that's objectively bad. The problem with, I know you guys don't like to say you have a worldview, but to say you don't have a worldview is almost like to say that you don't have an existence. You can't really be a human being without a worldview. The difference is that you can't, from your worldview, look at any of those people and say this is good or this is bad. You have to actually jump into our worldview and use our objective standards of what's right and what's wrong to say President Trump is bad because of this, because in an atheistic worldview, the definitions of good and bad have no meaning. It's all subjective. It's all your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you say those things. I have a worldview. Fine. But what I'm saying is it's not the one you're telling me it is.
What have I said? What have I said that's wrong? If you would want to clarify, correct, that's fine.
Why don't you clarify that first, and then I'm going to have a question for you too. So.
Yeah. Maybe just jump to the question. I'll gather my thoughts on the world.
And can you and I just have some rapid fire dialogue on this real quick?
Yeah, just go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So I think you do have a worldview, and I think it's an atheistic worldview. Your response?
Yeah, I think maybe you have a flat definition of what you need to believe an atheistic worldview is in order to hold your own beliefs as something separate. My worldview is mine as a person, and sure, I have it, but we don't all conform to what you seem to be telling us our worldview is.
Well, please tell me.
Well, one of the things is that I would say in order for you to have an objective view of what's good and bad, you have to appeal to my view that morals come from evolution, because we all have shared moral systems across cultures, across religions. Somehow other religions have figured out, without your God, not to murder people. Somehow atheists have figured out to murder people less than Christians do. And my view is that's because we have evolved a moral system that informs us not to do those things. And when you are saying it's God that told you that, you're actually appealing to my view that it's evolution.
We're appealing to God's revealed word. Romans 2, the law of God is written upon their hearts.
Could I respond to something there?
Go for it.
You're saying, like, you're pointing to the atheistic worldview, whatever that is, and I think it's worth kind of, for the scope of this conversation, kind of nipping that in the bud, because atheism is the answer to one question: do you have a belief in God or not? Right? Has very little to do with morality. In fact, that's what we're talking about tonight, is morality. So maybe a better question might be, if you're interested, where do you get your morals, and what, and I would say my moral values are human-based, right? Human-based, so I would call my belief system humanism, right? And to kind of move forward in the conversation, you're going to find this definition shocking, but if Buddhists believe in Buddha, Christians believe in Christ, what do humanists believe in? Humans, right? Believe in what? That we're perfect? No. That we can do no wrong? Absolutely not. We screw up all the time. Humanism, simply put, is the belief in humans' ability to fail and learn from it, and then fail a little bit better next time, which ties in directly with constructivism. This is a beautiful building that you guys have here, and the beautiful sanctuary, right? I'm sure the very first time that we as a species tried to build a building, never mind something as beautiful as churches can be, right? it didn't quite work out the way this one did, right? It wasn't as successful, but they screwed it up and they learned from it and they failed a little bit better next time. And, that's kind of how progress happens, right? And I'm using construction as an example of morality in the exact same way. So humanism, which is kind of like what I think, you can chime in,
Co-sign on that.
yeah, that's what we're representing here as far as where does morality come from. That's what we're repping. Does that make sense?
And my point is, I know that I've heard the arguments of atheism is not a claim that there is no God. It's I don't have a belief in a God. And, okay, I grant you that. But you are operating as if God doesn't exist, right? Your worldview operates as if there is no God, right? And so what I'm saying is that if that be the case, there are necessary implications to that. One of those necessary implications is that life has no ultimate meaning. Life has, and you can deny that, but it is a logical, undeniable implication that one, life has no ultimate meaning, and two, there's going to be no ultimate accountability. And so if you walked into a room with 100 college students and say, let me just teach you the implications of atheism, life has no ultimate meaning, there's no ultimate accountability, there's no objective standard of right and wrong, go live your life, that's a pretty terrifying reality to base your life upon.
Yeah, good thing we don't believe that.
Well, okay.
Right.
So,
I know you say that.
Right,
I know
right.
you say that.
Well, and
I know
what-
you say that, but the problem
I
is
heard
when
you.
you make an affirmation, there are implications that are unavoidable. And I know you don't like those implications because they're terrible. So you try
they're
to
terrible.
attach a Christian moral worldview to what you believe, so it can at least be plausible.
I mean, I
That's-
know you
that's-
like those because they are terrible.
Yeah, they're awful.
I'd be happy to respond to those like piece by piece. It seemed like there are three, and they seem important to whatever that rebuttal is. But if you want to do them one at a time, we can do that.
Okay, one at a time.
Three
Let's do 'em.
implications.
Because you're
Sure.
telling me something I have to believe.
I'm telling you something that is a necessary implication of what you're saying. It's the logical conclusion of what you're saying. And those three are that there is no eternal accountability. There's no ultimate accountability for my actions. Morality is purely subjective. And I know. Hang on. You can take it. There's no ultimate
I have
meaning
to remember them
life.
is the problem. Yeah.
No ultimate meaning to life. No accountability. No standard for morality.
Okay, let's start. Meaning of life.
Can I just like all in one? I got
Yes.
good news, y'all. I got great news. You can be a moral person and not have a God belief.
Well,
And furthermore, because you mentioned something else, you can be a moral person and not have a hell belief. And I would humbly say, hey, I would hope to be a good example of that, because whatever people that you are, like these mystery fantasy people that you're saying are that we should all be worried about, yeah, I wouldn't want to be around those people either. And so good thing that we do have a sense of morality. Good thing that we do have given a lot of thought to what does right and wrong mean.
We're not saying
That-
you behave that way. We're saying it is the logical implications
Well,
of your
yeah, but it's
worldview.
not.
but okay, so that
Tell us why.
I think yes. I think what I want to hear from this side is a little bit more articulation of what are the foundations of morality. We have some very clearly here. Now, saying that there's an objective
Yeah.
standard by which we judge our morals, and those tell us about things that are both eternal and non-changing. So tell me about what are those standards of morality for not, as you said, there may not be a atheist worldview, but the charge here is that your basic arguments lead irrevocably to what they're saying. So tell me, what are some of the foundations then of morality from your perspective?
Yeah. I mean, so their view is that morality comes from God, from an outside source, and it's objective. And if only they can interpret it right, then they know what is bad and good. And other people somehow interpret it wrong, but they've got the right interpretation, so they know for sure what God's saying, and it's objective and true. Yeah, I mean, sure. I'm sorry, people don't interpret God?
Ben, give us your response.
Yeah.
Give us your
Could I-
response to what we say are the
yeah,
logical
keep
conclusions.
going.
Rather
I wanna
than
try to visit
insulting
the-
our worldview, give us a response.
I'm
No,
understanding it.
No, hold on. I just want to call time for a second. I don't think it was an insult. I think he's trying to respond. So let's just give a little place here.
Yeah. Yeah. So there was something about how do you find meaning? And I would say the same place we all find meaning is really in relation to each other. So what's meaningful to me is my place in the community of people and my relationships to those people, what I mean to those people. That's where I derive meaning.
Is it
If
ultimate meaning?
That ultimate meaning. Yeah. If I'm in a universe totally alone by myself and there's no one else, I feel it's likely that I wouldn't feel like I have meaning. But if there's other people there, then yeah, I derive meaning in my place in relation to them, to answer that part. Ultimate accountability. So I'm, again, accountable to them. They're going to have thoughts about my behavior and my actions. I'm also accountable to me. So I think one of the things that's cast upon atheists is like, if you don't have God watching, how will you be moral? And the truth of it is I'm always watching. Even if I did something and I got away with it and it was perfect and there was no evidence, I know I did it. And I will have moral feelings about that because I'm a person. And that's how people are, unless they're sociopaths, psychopaths. So that's accountability to me, in my view.
Okay. Now I want to let y'all respond. Then I want you to be able to say why what he said felt like an attack on your worldview as well, because I don't think that was the intent. But I want to hear what you were responding to there and what that brought up. So both of those things.
It's an attack on the worldview. I mean, it's fine, but to say Christians have done bad things in the past, which was what Patrick was alluding to, we have a foundation to say yes, and those were bad, because we recognize there is an objective moral standard in which we are held accountable to. In a naturalistic worldview, the standard is whatever you want your standard to be. So perhaps it's a secular humanist constructivist standard of moral truth, or it's going to be something else. But you can't even really say that those things are moral truth because there isn't morally true, because there is no moral truth. Each system comes back to the individual, Patrick or Ben, as the authority on what the moral system should be. And if the individual is the authority of what the moral system should be, me and Brandon are right.
Could I respond to that? You're saying that your standard of morality is vertical, right? God is the morality, embodies that, right? Okay, and your accountability is to God and obedience, right? What we're saying is morality is horizontal. Our obligation is to each other. And like Ben said, if you do something wrong that harms somebody else, they might not know, but you'll know. And when they do know, that's going to be a problem, right? I mean, not in terms of just the harm, but our accountability is to each other. And I heard a broader question that you were asking, Brandon, which I thought was a really good one. What do you believe in a positive sense? I base my morality, and I believe morality in general is based on 3 values. Number 1, the truth. I believe that we should seek it and that we should speak it to each other. Why? Because it helps us to survive and thrive. I believe in the value of personal freedom, right? That it's your life, your choice, and you get to decide how you live it as long as you're not stepping on anybody else's freedom, right? So that's the second value. Why? Because it helps us to survive and thrive. The third value that I believe, which ties it all together, is the value of love. Love corrects the excesses of freedom. If what I do for my own interests is hurting somebody else, I am accountable to them. The value of love includes sustainability, includes community that Ben alluded to. Those are core values. And the good news is, you don't have to be an atheist or a secular humanist to believe those. I would say that everybody does, including Christians. I mean, every single one of those values are included in somehow in the Christian faith, right? We might define them differently, and we might use different methods to, like, say, for example, establish the truth. You might have a role for faith in your search for the truth that I would not consider valid, right? And so at the end of the day, if, let's say, science is pointing you in a direction in terms of evidence, in terms of, like, you know, the origins of the earth or whatever, and your faith is telling you something different, then you have a choice to make that I personally would not feel that I am bound by, because I don't have that obligation to faith. Another example for the value of freedom, if I may, is that most faiths would include what I would consider false fear, the threat of hell, and false hope, meaning either the reward in heaven or divine aid and intervention, and I would consider those as stepping on the value of freedom, right, in terms of that they are ways to manipulate it. And also, you would define the value of love differently.
Pat,
Okay, I want you all to be able to respond to all of that, because there's a lot there. Sure. Before you respond to that, though, I want to ask you one simple question, quick answer. So you gave us some values. Where would you say they come from?
From our need to survive and thrive.
Okay, so back to the.
So Patrick,
okay.
You said something interesting there. When you started off, you said ours is vertical, yours is horizontal, and you mentioned a horizontal obligation. Where is that obligation? Did you just make that up?
No, of course.
Obligation. So if you believe that you have an obligation, somebody else doesn't agree that such an obligation exists, who is true?
I think it goes back to the values that we just talked about. It goes back to the law of the land. It goes back to your relationships with those people. In other words, if somebody says, well, I saw it and I took it because I wanted it, right? Do they get to decide what's right or wrong, in the sense of they took somebody else's sandwich or whatever, right?
If I can respond, I think so to me, you've heard my belief on where morals come from is evolution. I think it's grounded in that. I think it comes from that. So I think people are born with an intuition to have an obligation to each other. So I think the naturalistic view, to put it, is that you are born with that obligation. You are born with the feeling that you have the obligation. Most people don't want to survive alone by themselves for their whole life.
So you're saying they're born with a feeling, and they feel their obligation is to community, but you can't through evolutionary biology define what even that community even is. You can decide that it's all of humanity, but somebody else might decide it's the Aryan race, and their definition of their community and what is evolutionary beneficial to them is just as valid of your value system or whatever you would prefer that it be.
Can you talk a little bit then about what your value system then does in opposition to that?
Well, let me say one point to what you just said, and that
it.
really gets to the heart of what we're discussing tonight. As far as I understand, the question or the topic was that what is the basis of morality? That term basis means support or foundation for said belief. And what he's describing is this foundation that is not just shaky, but it crumbles underneath the weight of these moral obligations, because there is no obligation for someone who says, I disagree with you. And I just want to point out to that idea, you talked about love, truth, and freedom. I agree with love and truth. I think it's hard to define those terms in an atheistic worldview. But the freedom aspect, this is another reason why I say that from your worldview, this is not going to lead to human flourishing, because if you take what you said about freedom, then prostitution is okay, drug use is okay, watching pornography is okay, because I can do all of those things and not hurt anyone else. And this is how you get cities like Portland that are a disaster
Okay.
with that type of thinking.
You can respond to that
Do-
real
do
quick,
you-
and
do
then
you
I do still want to hear Tim kind of give me the other side of we'll say the constructive side of what you were challenged them on. But yeah,
do
go
you
for
feel
it.
like those things lead to thriving and flourishing?
The atheistic worldview does not lead to thriving and flourishing.
Well,
no.
thank you for defining our worldview again. Appreciate it. Noted. It's about the fourth time.
Anytime.
We're here for you. We're here for you. We can answer these questions if you would only ask. We're here for you.
Well, and I wanted-
and we did have some thoughts. I think Ben's point was perfect in the sense that do those things.
I'll take it.
Yeah, right. Do those things, drug use being one example, prostitution being another one that we can talk about. Do they lead to human flourishing? Do they lead to, just like for all those relationships that would be involved in those types of situations, taking drug use as an example, I would say that drug use, depending, is contrary to freedom, contrary in most cases to flourishing. I mean, it's like, okay, pot is one thing, heroin is another, but at the same time, I personally don't use any kind of drug, not even tobacco, because not because like I'm under some kind of moral obligation to it. It's just it's not what I choose to survive and thrive, and nor would I recommend that to like my kids, like that sort of thing. But I think to your point about like these values coming back to a Christian worldview, I think I've pointed out two examples at least where, although a Christian can believe in truth, absolutely, there's going to be a conflict there between truth and the obligations of faith. There's going to be a conflict there between the value of freedom and the false fear and false hope that come with some of that dogma. And I know you're not espousing freedom, so I won't pin that on you. But I guess to your point, Brandon, about where do they come from, these are lessons learned. The society that we live in is based on these three values, I would say, in terms of our ability as a society to function, to operate ethically. You really can't do it without them. If we don't have a sense that we're all in this together, if we don't have a sense that we are accountable to each other, that what we do can't just be for right now, it has to be sustainable, right? That value of love answers a lot of the objections that you're posing, but saying, well, what about the least of these? What about if everybody decides that that we're all going to like the situation that you're describing, which is not what we're advocating, would be like the wolf and the fox and the sheep all getting together to decide who's for dinner, right? I mean, that could not work, and that's not what we're advocating, right? We're trying to include all the voices in the conversation, say, hey, what works for all of us here? Why? Because we're all in this together. And I'd say that works a lot better when we do have that obligation to each other than when you have one person or one group saying, I know, like, this is the will of God, and I know what it is. Because what we've seen in the past, throughout history, is that you want a guaranteed recipe for disaster, get a bunch of hardliners in there who all think they have the voice of God. It's from top to bottom throughout history.
Hold on. I know that they have accused you all of having a caricature of atheists and agnostics at times. What are you hearing? How do you respond to their depiction of your understanding of a Christian worldview or a morality rooted in your values?
I don't think I have enough time to answer that question. And I'm not sure I heard a clear articulation of the Christian worldview other than straw men. And Ben, when you made your points, I affirmed everything that you said. That's exactly what I believe about atheism. Everything you said is exactly what I believe about atheism. The one thing you didn't get into was, what we've been talking about tonight, objective truth, but you got into accountability and you got into meaning. And what you described was temporary accountability and temporary meaning, which is exactly what I think you believe. That's what I've been trying to say, is that you have no ultimate meaning. You have no ultimate accountability. And let me just say, that's where nihilism comes from. That's where the worldview that says, well, if that's true, then nothing matters. And just to give you a testimony of nihilism, I've been sober for going on 20 years, and so I've been in a lot of recovery rooms, and I remember being in a recovery room with a girl who was an atheist, and she, because of the logical conclusions of atheism, became a nihilist. And she concluded that if this is true, then life has no meaning, and she destroyed herself with sex, drugs, and alcohol. That's what we're saying, is that I affirm everything you said. You made my point perfectly. What I'm telling you is that for many people, if that was the norm that we actually live by, because I don't think you guys live that way. I mean, Patrick, you seem like a very upstanding citizen. Not that you don't, Ben. You just Patrick's studying all these things, and he's really
He has a shirt tucked in.
He's got his shirt tucked in.
Yeah,
my point is
I
that
hear- okay.
this is the worldview that leads to those things, and I thank you for articulating that way, because I have not been misrepresenting your view. You said exactly what I think atheists believe.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I want to hit on the temporary part.
Go with that real quick, and then we're getting close to time for discussion. So,
Sure. I'm genuinely glad you're recovered, and whatever worldview it takes for that, I'm happy for it, genuinely. But people in Christian worldviews manage to have drug problems also, and all that. So those parts are temporary to me. I mean, it is my view that life is temporary and mine will end, and then nothing happens, just like before I was born. So yeah, I get that point. I will say that the morals and the things I believe are larger than that. They're larger than me, because they're part of the community I'm in. They're part of humans existing, and they're part of whenever humans exist. Those things exist, and that's important to me, and I've been a part of that. And it's also, even outside of that, there's a sense of it existing outside of me, because it is the behaviors and actions that lead to the best thriving and flourishing for people who depend on each other for survival. So there's a view of it outside of me and my choices.
all right.
Can I make just one, and I'm done?
Yeah, one, and then I want to hear one, a closing thought or so from each of you, and then we're going to go.
This is my closing thought.
Okay, great.
I think what was said at the very beginning set the tone for the entire night. And it came from Patrick. And I've said this, you've affirmed that this is what you said, is that the moral oughts and the moral shoulds, which is exactly what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about morality. Morality is what you ought to do and what ought not to do. Come from what causes us to survive and thrive. That's exactly what he described. That is the atheistic evolutionary worldview. And I'm contending that if that be the case, then that is not only a slippery slope, that is a very dangerous worldview.
Okay. I'll let you go next.
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time and given a lot of thought this evening to expressing what a worldview that is based on a horizontal morality, our obligation to each other, can look like. And we've given you 3 values of, that. I think morality is based on truth, freedom, and love. I don't know why, in the context of all that, where's the obligation or the interest or the need to say, oh yeah, but nihilism. Neither one of us are nihilists. And nor does our morality point to nihilism. Right? In fact, I can point to many situations where people who had the exact same morality as you acted completely immorally. So, in other words, this claim of objective morality, when it comes down to the rubber meeting the road, is not a guarantee of good behavior at all. And in terms of pastors even just having gross misuses of the trust of their communities, and we can get into that. The Southern Baptist faith even founded on the objectification of chattel slavery, not against some other culture somewhere else, against fellow Christians. right? So when we're saying, hey, our obligation is to each other. We believe in telling the truth, which is counter to the abuse of humans. We believe in human freedom. Of course, that is counter to the abuse of humans. And we believe in a sense of love. That morality could have prevented those abuses. And that's what we're here to represent.
Okay, great. Before I get to you, I want to point out that it wasn't only Southern Baptists. Sure. There's a lot of different denominations and Christians in that boat.
Yeah.
So
Only
Did
the
you
Southern
look me up
Baptists are
before
here.
it came? Did you look me up? How do you know I'm
because-
Southern Baptist?
I just wanted to make sure that, I wanted to make sure that we point, I mean, I'm a Methodist, and there were Southern Methodists too, right? Sure. So that cuts across many lines. Okay.
So there was a thought I had, and I wanted to be sure to share it with you tonight. I was going down a YouTube rabbit hole, just killing time, and I saw an interview with an actor named Christopher Waltz. And he's been in a ton of stuff. He's a phenomenal actor. And he played a Nazi colonel named Hans Landa in a Tarantino movie. And if you've never seen the movie, just go watch this opening 20, 25 minutes, whatever it is. And it's an incredible performance. I think he won an Oscar for it. But what's so eerie about it is that he plays this evil character who's hunting Jews, and he comes to this dairy farm, and he knocks on the door, and he says, "Oh, what beautiful daughters you have, and may I have a glass of milk at your dairy farm?" And he pulls out his pipe, and he's so nonchalant, so casual. And it's eerie how casual it is as he's doing something so horribly evil. Well, Christopher Waltz was asked in this interview, how did you play an evil character like that so well? And Christopher Waltz's response was, he's not evil. He's not evil. His character doesn't see himself doing an evil thing. And in a naturalistic worldview, if you're going to be a consistent naturalist, that all there is matter and energy flying through the universe, you can decide for yourself what good and evil is. And Hans Landa decided it wasn't evil. In fact, it was good to hunt Jews. And that was key to the way that Christopher Waltz portrayed this character, because he wasn't objectively evil. And the challenge is that I know and you know that hunting Jews is objectively evil, but only the Christian worldview, not the naturalistic worldview, can justify that.
Okay.
I'll attempt, while we're making closing arguments,
Yeah.
I'll attempt that.
Hey, if you want to talk about that more, come find me afterwards. I'm
Well,
happy to talk about
but
it.
there, you may get questions about that in a minute, so that's good.
Tim
All right,
didn't want to
so
say the name
wrap
of the
up real
movie.
quick so we can get some
So,
questions. I think there are going to be some good questions tonight.
Next time you're having a feeling, a strong feeling, you're incredibly sad, tell yourself you're not. That's what he's saying. People have morals because they're human. So my pitch would be, when you feel your better nature, when you feel your moral intuition, spend time listening to it. Make sure you can hear it, because there have been tens and thousands of ancestors, generations that listened to that, and it succeeded. It made their life better. It made them better people in their community. That's why that's there. You know, whether you're Christian, whether you're atheist, you're doubting, you're some other religion, spend time meditating on that. That leads you to a good place. And the reason their pitch of what we are isn't true is because we don't get to just turn those feelings off when we have them. They're pretending like we get to turn our morals off when we feel them. Or when you're crying, you can just say, "No, I'm not," and stop. That's not true.
I used to live that way. I used to follow my heart, and I destroyed my life.
We're doing 2 rounds.
Okay,
of
we're gonna go to questions now. We're gonna go to
What
questions
you were
now.
following
But I
wasn't
think
your heart.
I think no matter what else, we can tell that there are very different worldviews up here, right? And very different even perspectives of one another's worldview. And that's a beautiful place to start with some questions. So, Elliot, I'm going to give you this microphone, and you can start taking questions.
All right, everybody, real quick, give a massive round of applause to all 5 of these gentlemen. It is very, very tough, I can tell you from experience, to be up here and to be open and willing for people to push back on your ideas. It is a difficult place to be, and I know oftentimes, because I get to people watch at these events, and I love it. Oftentimes throughout the event, I will see like little exclamation points pop up over people's heads. It's really interesting, and that's the point, you guys. We want you to find yourself in a space where you can say to somebody, I don't know that I really agree with that, man. Help me understand, right? Because otherwise we're just yelling at each other and nothing ever seems to get better, you know? But I will say a couple of things real quick. We are going to questions. I want you to raise those hands really, really high. I will walk around. We will stay here as long as the wonderful people that run this church will allow us. They will kick us out eventually. So do not do what I'm doing right now. Don't just keep talking. Finish your sentence as quickly as possible. Let me give you some examples. A question sounds like, oh, you got it? Okay. So if you start rambling, I'm going to steal the microphone, okay? But get those hands up. I have the first question because, I got the microphone. Hey, guys, to all of you, and Brandon, of course, as well. Feel free to jump in. If our conclusions about morality are the same, does the origin matter?
You're asking that to us?
Oh, yeah.
It matters tremendously. It matters how we legislate, how we build society, because you might come to one conclusion and then change your mind the next day to a different conclusion, or through a series of events change your mind, and then 150 years from now cast judgment on people that came before you and condemn them, but have no basis to even condemn them from. So yeah, it mattered. I mean, I'm glad that when I'm happy to talk about the movie analogy more. I agree that all four of us up here would say that what the character he was portraying was doing is evil. And I'm grateful that we all agree on that. There's a lot of values that these guys said, and we do agree on it. But at the end of the day, it is going to matter on what foundation your system of morality is built upon, or else it's bound to crumble.
Any other thoughts on that before we go?
I mean, I think there's a way in which it doesn't in the current day. It matter as much, it can be seen as an academic thing, but it certainly matters in how we see the future. And I think better knowledge leads to better outcomes. So I think in that sense, it matters.
Awesome. Let me see those hands. I see a bunch. Fantastic. Just keep throwing them up every single time, you guys, as high as you can.
Hey, everybody. As you can tell, it's difficult for me to stay out of the conversation. It seems like every time we get on this topic of morality, especially when it's Christians and atheists in the conversation, it just gets more frustrating for me. Because there's a lot of, the perfect example was, oh, you're misrepresenting my worldview, but there's no clarity that follows it up. But at the end of the day, I am here to really scrutinize my worldview against good arguments. That's what I want to do, because I want to have the best argument.
Question?
Yeah. Yep. Because I want to have the best argument. Can anyone on the stage give me a compelling argument for morality outside of a Christian worldview? Something that'll really make me think, man, this has some value and I need to question my stance. Because to be totally honest, and I don't mean to be insulting, I didn't get that.
Yeah, I'm sure this is very frustrating. If you're looking for us to show up in a certain way, and then we don't. If you're looking for us to say, oh yeah, nihilists, and then we're not. I agree that morality really matters, so much so that I'm dedicating my life to studying it, right? And so these conversations right here, I'd say, are a great starting point for constructive morality. We're living it. Just because a guy or someone says God says this, not a very strong foundation for morality. You can put pomp and circumstance, you can put ominous dominus, ceremonial, whatever you want. it still is nothing but somebody saying, God said this, thus saith the Lord. That's all it is. What we're talking about is a process that we, on this stage, despite strong disagreements, are able to have a respectful hearing of each other and conversation. I think this is a good example. It's the best we got.
So my basis is on evolution by natural selection. So I would want you to take an effort in understanding that before I could expound on why morals are based on that. In the same way that I think you would need me to understand the correct way of interpreting God's word for me to understand the moral basis that's based on, the morality that's based on that. So I see those as like, they're kind of the same. You're saying it's from God, I'm saying it's from evolution. I don't understand why it's from God. You don't understand why it's from evolution. We're on equal terms.
All right, let me see those hands. I know we got one here. Okay, perfect. You know what? I'm just going to say this, but keep throwing your hands up every time. I'm just going to go in a nice little horseshoe because it makes it easier for me. But keep throwing those hands up. We got one here.
Okay, God is the source of objective morality. But what I see is that it's always interpreted by humans, and they come up with different answers. So why is that standard better than just saying it's humans coming up with the best they can do?
It's not about a better standard. It's about what is the true standard. And so, to answer your question about why there's differing interpretations, we could talk about tiers of doctrine and things like that. Don't have to get into that tonight. But my favorite analogy is that God's nature as a perfect circle, and what is moral according to his nature as a perfect circle. Us being sinful, fallen creatures, our morality is a circle too, but it's squiggly and uneven, and through the study of God's word, then we are conforming that circle, our deceitful hearts, back to the perfect circle that is of God's nature. And so we will get there one day, glorified bodies and all of that. But it's not. The question is not an argument over which is better. I would certainly could argue that the Christian worldview is better for flourishing. I think we see that in lots of ways. But it's which moral system is true.
Yeah, and I would add, I hear this a lot, the question that you asked, and it comes across saying, why are there so many different interpretations? There's so many denominations. The truth of the matter is that Christians, Protestants, conservative Christians agree on a great deal more than they disagree. And when it comes to the fundamental doctrines of our faith, what we would call first-tier issues, we all agree on those things. What you're talking about are second and third-tier issues. And those issues, so when it comes to morality, like we agree across the board what marriage should be, that murder is wrong, that lying, stealing, cheating, all these things are wrong, because those are the clear standards in Scripture that no one really disputes. Now, what you're talking about are these lesser issues that we can talk about and we can have disagreements, but it's really kind of a flawed talking point to say that there's all these different interpretations. When there's all these different interpretations, they're usually referring to tertiary issues, not these major issues that we're talking about.
And just a quick reminder, folks, once we end this event, you can go up to those wonderful people and continue the conversation. We had one here, and then I saw back here. We're just going to keep moving around, you guys. Don't worry.
Gentleman on the left, you gave some examples of the objective God-based morality. Earlier you mentioned if you murder or rape, you should be put to death. I think we all agree on that. The only problem is, according to like God's Bible, those are not always that big of a deal, especially rape. In the Bible, you either pay 50 shekels or you just marry your victim and you're good with God. So that's just one of countless examples of us shedding the Bible and evolving as a society. And I'm curious why you're not more terrified of living in that kind of society. That sounds a lot worse to me than Portland.
I'm trying to understand What's worse, a worldview in which every human being has an inherent worth and value, regardless of how you might feel about that person, or a worldview that says all we are is just matter and energy, and the starting point is that nothing matters?
I just want to interject that I'm an atheist, and I believe that humans have an inherent value regardless if they believe what I believe.
You can believe that, but someone else can totally reject it, and they're just as valid as what you believe.
There are people of faith who totally reject that also.
Right, and I have a foundation in which to say that they are wrong.
And I have
Same.
a foundation in which to say that other people are wrong.
Which is just you, right?
Well, no, and my beliefs and my worldview.
My belief, yeah, you, right? That's the whole
you
difference.
also.
No, it's
I'm
not.
saying we're in the boat
That's the
together,
difference.
man.
No, that's the difference. We point and say there is an external, remember my definition in the beginning? There is an external source of objective morality that we point to and say
Yes, there's evolution, and it has made us moral.
And who
it's
has
external.
Who has decided that evolution should be the way in which we form our moral systems?
Who has decided that God is the way in which we should form our moral systems?
God.
Oh, okay, thank you.
That's why we're all Muslim, right? Okay.
Well, don't hear us as saying, here's something that is misconstrued. We don't think you're immoral people. We don't think that you're nihilist. We don't think you're bad people. I have a good friend in the audience. I don't know how he feels about me, but I like Gary Parker a lot. And I tell Gary all the time, I think Gary is one of the most upright, moral, kind, good businessmen, honest. He's a good friend. And I tell Gary, I said, but none of that is because you're an atheist. It's in spite of it. Gary grew up in Tennessee. He grew up in Memphis. Sorry, Gary, I'm talking about you. He grew up in a Christian tradition. He grew up in a Christian household. He moved here to Mount Juliet 22 years ago. I think that the things that make Gary this good man are the Christian influences that he's had in his life. And it's not the atheism that has led to this lifestyle.
I know you're not going to like this, but I believe that the good person you are and the morals that you have are because of the long history of evolution that has brought those into you in spite of the God you believe in.
Yeah, but if evolution's true, then we're just in the animal kingdom. You don't condemn a lion when he eats a gazelle, right? That's just called lunch. That's not murder.
We're not
That's
lions.
called lunch.
We're
Right.
not lions.
Well, there's no difference. There's no difference. And an atheistic worldview, there's
There
no
is a
difference.
difference.
And because you say so.
Well, I'm the atheist, so which one of us has the authority?
Well, there's no authority.
Everyone has authority.
There's no authority in atheistic worldview. There's no ultimate authority.
I'm
You
going
say that
to
we're
make a
different.
radical statement that I believe lions are different from humans.
Okay,
That's your
guys.
opinion.
All right. I let them go a little bit longer because they're on the stage. They do get special treatment, you guys, yes. No, we've got a couple other questions. I know we're just keep going around. We got one right here.
Yeah, this is to the atheist humanist side. Two-part question real quick. Do you believe human life has a higher intrinsic value than the life of other animals? And do you believe that humans have higher rights than other animals? And if so, why?
Yes, I would say that humans do have a higher value. Number one, because I'm partial to humans. Secondly, I would say because we have a greater rule-making ability with our ability to reason. And even though there are, some moral behaviors in animals, what I'm talking about is our ability to do exactly what we're doing right now. Reason, hear each other out, language, the ability to codify, write down, like all of these things enable greater moral behavior, like Ben mentioned, as part of our evolutionary heritage, if you will. And so, yeah, I think personally, I would say yes, humans do have a higher moral worth. Doesn't mean that we should be act immorally. However, we can talk about what that means towards other species.
Can I respond to that? Then that would mean, so this is what we're talking about by implications. Then that would mean if someone has value because they can reason, and what else did you say? Because they have empathy, because they can love. I mean, would you agree with all that? What sets us apart from the animal kingdom? If that's what gives somebody value, then a person in a coma has none of that. And so if a person doesn't have the ability to reason, doesn't have the ability to have empathy and love, are they stripped of value? because that's what that's implying. This is why in the Christian worldview, even the person who is near death in the coma, who can contribute nothing to society, but actually is a drain on society because they're requiring resources to keep them alive, we would say as Christians they have objective meaning and value because they're created in the image of God. But what you just described strips them of the very thing that makes them valuable as humans. This is why we're saying it's a dangerous, slippery slope.
Yeah, I don't think you probably heard anything in what I said about a lack of inherent worth or that the worth itself comes from reason. What I'm talking about is our ability to, he asked a question about, worth in terms of our morality. As humans, I think reason is helpful for that. Now, what I think it's worth making a slight distinction here. While I think evolution is a part of where morality comes from, and we mentioned that at the beginning, that is just a starting point. That's sort of like a default setting, right? I think our methods for how we solve moral questions is what really gets us to a lot of the questions that you guys are rightfully asking, right? In other words, okay, evolution is just our starting point. Now where do we go from here? And that's where how good our systems are for building that morality and hearing each other out, that is going to produce better or worse morality, and that's what we're advocating. In other words, we're not just saying, hey, evolution's got it. Evolution is baseline, and that's where we build from there.
All righty, let me see some hands again. Let me see some hands. Fantastic. We got one here we're going to go to, and we're going to keep coming around.
All right, so I've heard the word flourish used multiple times tonight. I want to know what you mean when you say flourish.
Flourishing is when we fulfill God's commands in the early chapters of Genesis to be fruitful, multiply, and take dominion over the earth, all for the glory of God.
Go ahead. Yeah, I think Patrick, you also used the word flourish a lot.
Yeah, I think flourish is defined as each individual person would define, like, it's your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness, right? As long as you're not stepping on somebody else. If, being a Bedouin in the desert is your picture of flourishing, watching the sun rise in the east and set in the west, great. If if your idea is to, have a family, be a surgeon, any number of walks of life, that's ultimately up to the person. And where we're making a difference, a distinction, is that what they're saying is, no, God knows best for your life. God is the one who tells you, and we are saying, hey, no, each individual person, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, as long as you're a part of a moral system, you are the one who's deciding the path that you choose for your life.
Okay, so this is a follow-up question real quick. So both of you talked about flourishing in terms of individualistic. So is flourishing something that you do as an individual, or is there a community aspect to flourishing?
No, I didn't say anything about individuality.
Use the word you.
Oh, okay. The early chapters of Genesis, being fruitful and multiplying and taking dominion over all of creation as God has commanded us to do, happens in communities. It happens in families, in covenant marriage. It happens in churches as members of a local covenant church membership. It happens as nations, and it does happen as a human race, as a creation of God Almighty. And so God has ordained the family, the government, communities. And so we are not intended to live in isolation by God's design.
Yeah, and a person flourishes, according to a Christian worldview, when they obey the laws of God, when they are in accordance with what God has said. What you heard from the other side is that it's basically determined by the individual person. And so going back to this concept of freedom and then combine it with this concept of whatever I think flourishing is, again, the drug addict, prostitute in Portland is flourishing, if they say so, even though they're destroying their lives. And countless of our young people are dying because of overdoses and suicides, yet they're operating according to freedom, they're operating according to what they think is flourishing, and to me, that doesn't look like human flourishing.
I think there's a part of it where the word gets used because it appeals to something that's a common idea, but there's a little bit of fuzziness to it on purpose. Because flourishing It appeals to a common idea that we all have. I would probably ascribe it to something along the lines of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think there's a part of that that says it needs to not require work or effort or labor from other people, and it needs to not infringe on the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of other people. So there's something around those ideas. But every time someone explains it, they're going to be appealing to other ideas. But that's also why it seems to be the common word that's used, I think.
And I think the short answer from our perspective to your question, Jeff, is yes, that we are social creatures, and flourishing has an inherent part of it, thriving, that is social, that is our ability to get along. And I mentioned it briefly, but it is part of a moral system. That's what I was referring to, is our ability to get along together in society, in moral behavior towards each other. So.
All righty, I know we've got a bunch more questions. We've got a couple over here, a couple over there. Fantastic. We got one right here.
Hey, this question's for Tim and Brandon. We've spoken publicly and privately about morality and your worldview. Can either of you guys first explain and then give your thoughts on the Munchausen trilemma?
Yeah, I read about that there. Explain that briefly to us.
Well, it's a philosophical argument that says that to ultimately justify anything, it's impossible for us to do, that you either end up with circular reasoning or an infinite regress or a dogmatic assertion. And so we can't ultimately prove anything, whether it be, in other words, when we start asking questions and we get to, well, how do we know this, how do we know this, eventually we get to an I don't know. And I've told both of you guys, I feel like that's the most honest answer when it comes to these questions, whereas at that point when we get to the I don't knows, you guys assert, well, that's where we insert God.
Yeah, okay, so that's the understanding I took away the other day when I read that, when you sent that to me. Yes, everyone is going to use circular reasoning. I would say for the secularists, that's going to be human reasoning, right? That's going to be human perspective. Everyone is going to appeal to an authority. Everyone is going to say, this is right because of this, right? And what we're saying is that that authority has an objective meaning. That authority has an objective standard in God. So yes, we are appealing to an authority, and you could argue that it's circular reasoning, but the question is not, is it circular reasoning? It's that who has the greatest ground to stand upon in their reasoning. And what we're saying is that, you know, there are things and urges inside of me that I want to do, and what keeps me from doing those things is not because I am acting out of the impulse of what I think is going to be flourishing. It's because there's something outside of me that says that you should not do that, and you should do this. And so that's the objective standard that we're appealing to.
Sweet. Let me see those hands. Let me see those hands. We got a couple over there. I'm going here, and then I'm going right there, and I'm going to keep coming around.
Good job, moderator, and I appreciate y'all speakers tonight. It's been good. Two-part question. One is, do you believe you have a conscience? And the second would be, do you believe that evil exists?
Yeah, so I believe I have a conscience. And I think when you said there's something inside of you that tells you what's right and what's wrong, to me, that's what I'm talking about as what's moral. I feel like when I'm saying I listen to that part, you're hearing it as I listen to the impulses and urges that you had that made you do the wrong things. I mean, I think we both have experienced that listening to those leads to bad outcomes for ourselves. That's why they're bad. That's why you have intuitions about what's right and wrong so that you don't do them. And I think we agree on the experience of that. To me, that's a conscience. So that internal experience of knowing what's right and wrong is what gives you a conscience. I do think it comes from evolution. Evil, I think there are things that I would use the word evil to describe, but I make an assumption here that probably the way I use it or understand it is different from the way that someone of faith would say something is evil, like it comes from Satan or is spiritual in some way. I use it in the way of just like it's incredibly bad and leads to harm and is ill-conceived or has bad intentions.
Yeah, and your second question, does evil exist? That was the question that really plagued Christopher Hitchens, my favorite atheist, by the way, besides Gary. Christopher Hitchens, his biggest problem when it came to his worldview was he knew that evil was an objective morality or objective reality. And he knew if that was true, then there has to be an objective standard that says something is good. You can only call a stick crooked if you know what a straight one looks like. And Hitchens understood that. And so to say something is objectively evil is to then say it's objectively evil because this is what's objectively good. And that's a major problem, I think, for the other side.
All righty, let me see those hands. I'm going right here, but where am I coming to next? Fantastic. I'm going to just keep walking around. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there. Here we go.
I probably don't need this. I've got a really loud voice, and I have to go to the bathroom really bad. So thank you. I was really excited about coming here tonight because I think that morality is a big issue in today's world. And I work in an industry to where I work with Christians of all sects and Jews and Muslims and Islam, every Taoist, every religion out there. And everyone believes that their way is the correct way. And most of this I have seen is because that's where they were born into. Their parents led them to believe that this was the way and the only way to believe. The question is, who are we to decide morality for everyone? And on a secondary question, because because Portland came up, how can that even be interpreted in this world where we have leadership that is far worse than what is happening in Portland? So I'm going to give this back now, and I'm going to let you all answer, and then I'm going to go to the bathroom because I really got to go. But I would love to hear all of this. I'm really interested in the answers.
So regardless of where somebody was born in that area of the world, what they might happen to cumulatively believe has no bearing on whether or not Jesus actually is God or not. And so you might be able to look at the world at demographic groups and say, I pull someone out of Iran, they're probably Muslim. I pull someone out of the United Kingdom, they're probably Muslim. I pull somebody out. Nobody got it. Yeah. Thank you, Elliot. I pull someone in the United States, maybe they're Christian. But in a conversation like this, it would be arrogant to say that that's why they're a Christian. You've got to get to know the person. You've got to talk to them and get to know their reasons for believing whatever their worldview is true. And but the second part of your question, who are we to, who am I to tell everyone else to conform to this morality? My answer to that is I am nothing but Jesus is king. And Jesus said, unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. And so I don't set what morality is, and I don't try to have a view of Scripture because of what I think the view of Scripture should be. I try to conform myself to the person of Jesus Christ, and I want to have the perspective of God's design and the perspective of Scripture that Jesus had.
I think it's a great question, and maybe it's the question that I take away from tonight, so thank you for it. I think that it's a wonderful place to start in terms of looking at the moralities. Who are we to say, right? What you heard on this side is the value of freedom, meaning that we all have the equal right I as a humanist and as an atheist, I strongly support religious freedom, for the right for Tim and Brandon and everybody to do as your conscience, draws you, and be obedience to what you think is right, or whatever it is, right? And what I would suggest is a key difference is that in the system that we are proposing, where you do have freedom, we all do have that ability to follow our conscience. When what you're hearing over here is that morality and obedience, it's either that way or the highway, right? And that's where I'm saying our morality is allows for differences in a way that their morality does not play well with others, if that makes sense.
All righty, I've got a couple of questions here. I've got one over there. Is that it? This might be the last three if I don't see your hand. All right, these are the last three questions right here, y'all.
All right, I'll make this quick, just to be honest and confess that I'm agnostic to start with. So, Tim, I'm just going to direct this to you just quickly, just because you brought this up, as a morality being evolutionary, that we should love, be honest, and also not hurt one another. If that is the case, and you honestly believe this, and the whole, everybody that's up on stage can raise their hands, who on stage thinks that stealing $900 from any department store should not be prosecuted? And the second part of that question, who's going to hold that person that does do it liable? And the person that also steals it, I guarantee you, does not feel like they're doing anything that's immoral.
So I'm Tim. I think you're. I think it was this.
Oh, on the far right, Ben.
Yeah.
Patrick.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying, hey, who's to say that something that is not that bad is that like $900 is not a felony, right? Or I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but
several states and several cities
right.
Now consider $900 worth of theft. They're not going to be stopped. They're not going to be charged. They're not going to be arrested. So
right.
Who's to hold them accountable? Because the people that steal that, I tell you, do not feel that they're being immoral when they steal it. When they're walking out with a TV. We're not talking about food for children or diapers for their kids. We're talking about people walking out with all kinds of different things.
Right. I think it's a great question, and it's kind of like you're asking two different things, like what is worth in prosecuting, right? Which is a legal thing, and I'm not really, different communities make different policies or whatever, but I would say that yes, they're taking something that does not belong to them, that is a moral issue, and yeah, I would say it's wrong. Now, right, and just because it's legal, I mean, this is biblical as well, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right, or, you know what I'm saying? We can say, hey, that is wrong, if it's a $900 TV or if the guy stole my sandwich. You know what I'm saying? I would say both of them are wrong because of it's stepping on somebody else's freedom. It's stepping on that business's ability to, I think it's a great question, but like the fact that it's legal doesn't get them off the hook, right? Right, but not morally.
Yeah, I
Great
get,
question.
Since you asked for hands, I'll also just say I think they erred in making it legal to steal $900.
And I agree with them, but the difference is that's their opinion versus whatever state you're referring to's opinion, right? So it's just a difference of opinion where we're saying that it's in the Ten Commandments to not steal, right? So there's objectively, we're not saying because we think it's going to lead to human flourishing or because it's what's good for society. We're saying do not steal because this is what it says in the law of God. It's objective standard, and that's what you're seeing over there. You're seeing a society that's operating without an objective standard. They're just going with the whims of the society, and that's the dangerous, slippery slope that we're talking about.
I'm curious, I guess, since you're asserting it would be better to kind of go by the Bible's laws, if you would prefer that we make the Ten Commandments law and abide by the punishments that are ascribed in the Bible?
And that is a fantastic question for us to explore after the event is over. Remember, folks, these wonderful gentlemen will be around for you to continue this conversation, and most of the people in this room are super, super awesome and interested in these conversations. Gently and politely ask, and I bet you'll find somebody. We've got 2 more questions, and then we can all hang out a little.
This question's primarily for Ben. I heard you say several times that it's our evolutionary past that gives us a nice horizontal morality, and you describe it in what would be nice, even Christian or any society's terms. But I've studied evolutionary theory for 40 years, and I don't see the basis for that. I don't think Darwin or Richard Dawkins would agree with you. Dawkins said, the universe just thinks you're blind, pitiless, indifference to you. So what difference does it make? So I would like to know what logical steps, if you could briefly summarize, how you go from evolutionary theory to a nice-based, flourishing morality.
Yeah, I more or less agree with you. I don't think Darwin or Dawkins probably would see it as strongly as I see it. I think Dawkins may be edging on it, but there is some good thought. I mean, I think there's good reason to believe that our moral intuitions that we have in common as humans are evolutionarily based. So, I mean, I think it's a thing where probably we'll talk and get into weeds, but essentially, we have existed in evolutionary history in tribes and not alone. And there are certain things that don't benefit the tribe and will get you kicked out. And getting kicked out means dying. So that's essentially the basis of why immoral behaviors tend to lead to death, which reinforces people who have moral intuitions around those things. Those intuitions keep them from doing those behaviors that cause them to cause problems in the tribe or not benefit the tribe, get kicked out and die. That reinforcing loop is a natural selection system which generates moral people.
All righty, folks. So we have one final question, but before we go to it, I'm going to say a couple of things because I know in about 5 to 6 minutes, y'all aren't going to care what I say. So, real quick, on a couple of these tables, there are QR codes. You can connect with us on all of the social medias, but most importantly, I would say, get the newsletter. That way you know when we are doing all of these awesome events, and you can bring that friend that you either really love or don't really like that much, just depending on how you feel. But seriously, guys, thank you all so much for being here. Remember, next month will be our final event of the year, November 20th, right here. So we hope you guys will all come back with us. We have one final question, and then we can all hang out.
So if morality and our moral compass is derived from the Christian God, what about the civilizations that existed pre-Christianity? Did they have a morality? Were they considered completely immoral? Do you believe in the civilizations that existed pre-Christianity?
Yeah, and there's civilizations right now that have never heard the name of Christ or anything about the Bible. And Tim said this earlier, that the Christian worldview says that we've been made in the image of God. So whether you know about Christ, whether you know about the Bible, we're all made in the image of God. And God has made us moral creatures. He's made us with a conscience, and He's written His law on our hearts. And so what he's referring to over here about his conscience and knowing right from wrong, that's because he's made in the image of God. God has made him that way. God has put on his heart what is right and what is wrong. Now, because of sin and his rejection and our rejection of God, those things go wrong terribly. But the reason all people around the world have this shared morality, like everybody knows it's wrong to murder and steal and to rape, right? How is that possible in a worldview where there is no objective standards? It's because God has put an objective standard on our hearts. When they appeal to what's inside of them, their intuitions, that's what they're appealing to.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here. One final round of applause for these amazing gentlemen. This is always a really, really great time. Remember, we will be back right here November 20th. Doors open at 6 p.m. We hope to see you guys there. Get home safe, everybody.